Welcome everyone to our SPED NET webinar, School-Based Testing for 504 Plans and IEPs, What You Need to Know About Academic and Cognitive Assessments with Dr. Mary Murphy. We are pleased to have you joining us. I'm Eve Kessler, co-founder and president of SPED NET, and along with Ali Sheffers, our tech consultant, we will be hosting this webinar. SPED NET was created over 25 years ago as a nonprofit to educate and empower parents of students with special needs to become their children's best advocates. In addition to our webinars, presentations, and support groups, we have a terrific and easily accessible website with videos of all our presentations and webinars, sorted by topic and speaker, as well as related articles and materials. Today, we welcome Dr. Mary Murphy, a clinical psychologist who specializes in counseling, executive function and academic coaching, psychological testing, psychotherapy, and biofeedback. Dr. Murphy completed advanced fellowship training at the Yale School of Medicine and is currently an adjunct professor at WestConn and in private practice in Newtown, Connecticut. If you find our information and support helpful, please feel free to donate to SPED NET. We are a nonprofit organization, and your donations go directly into programming. A couple of ground rules. Be mindful that this is an open forum and the presentation is being recorded, so we cannot guarantee confidentiality. You may not want to reveal any private information in your questions. A video of Dr. Murphy's webinar will be sent out to all of you by email and posted on our website and YouTube channel. If you have questions, please hold them until the end. Then please type them into the Q&A, not the chat. It's easier for us to keep track of them that way if they're in the Q&A. Any information provided in the presentation is for general informational purposes only and is not intended to be legal or therapeutic advice. Lastly, this webinar is presented in partnership with Wilton Public Schools and the Newtown SPED PTA. Thank you, Mary. We'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you. Thank you, Eve and Ali, for your help. I always usually start our webinars by explaining that I feel like SPED NET is my second home because for several years now, even before COVID, when we were all in person for everything, it's been several years now that, we've been through COVID together. Like, we've been through everything together. So I feel like this is, I really love to do these webinars. So I have to share that I already gave Eve permission to nudge me because I am very passionate about this particular topic. Most of the topics that we talk about at SPED NET are things that parents are really passionate about, and because it comes from, we're all kind of struggling with similar things. And so this is definitely one of the ones that pulls at a lot of emotions for most people, and I guess because of that, I'm very passionate about trying to help people as they're going through this. I am also a parent, and so I'm a clinical psychologist and I'm a professor, but I first and foremost am a parent. And so I've been on both sides of the PPT table many, many, many times. And so it's something that's like near and dear to me. And I truly do understand from the parent's perspective. So I definitely will go through today just kind of sharing with you the details that I think will help it be a little less dense than the kinds of things that we're usually having to read that are about school-based testing. So here we go. So just a little overview is that the overall goal is that really everything we talk about should be able to help parents become feel like empowered to be an active participant in the PPT process. And I'm going to go over the differences between what a psychoeducational evaluation and a clinical assessment would be. These are all things we need to know. And to try to make into more plain language what it's, how can we read and interpret the psychological test reports, that our kids are tested, and then we get these dense reports that are very hard to read. So I'm trying to demystify that tonight. And how do you take the information that we're given about the kids to look at progress and trends and the data. What does it look like over time? So we can make sense of it. And so all of this is, there's got to be a purpose, right? Like we're not just collecting data for data's sake. We want to use it to inform goals. So the better we understand the data that we're shown and given, the more we'll be able to contribute and be part of the collaborative goal setting that that should be happening. And sometimes we just don't feel empowered to do because we feel like we don't know enough to be able to do that. So hopefully this helps increase your confidence to do things like this. And then we'll just end with, some resources for how to get further information, because I could tell you this could be absolutely an all-day conversation, all-day workshop, right? So you will definitely need further information. The first thing I just want to share is that we kind of need like a glossary. Like I always joke that it's alphabet soup. All of these like acronyms and tests, and even like the professionals that we work with, everybody's got initials behind their names. Nobody knows what all these things mean. So we kind of need to know where people, what all of these different terms mean. So today we're going to talk about different things. One is the school-based testing. What kind of things can be done at the school? And that most of that will be about psychoeducational testing. So school-based testing, think about as like an umbrella category. And psychoeducational testing includes things like academic achievement. So that's, how well are the kids reading and writing and doing math? Like think about like we used to call it like what they call it, 3 R's, right? Reading, writing, arithmetic, which was really not spelling arithmetic correctly, right? It's kind of ironic. But anyway, the 3 R's, that's what academic achievement is. So the schools are capturing, where are they in terms of grade level and their peers at that point in time. That's, the fancy term that we see in our test reports from our kids that says their present level of performance. Well, how are they performing? That's just what it means. What are their academic scores? And they're normative. Like I'll show you what it means to be a standardized score and what that really means, and how it's really just your child compared to other kids of that grade level. And so that's really, if people were saying these 3 terms, they may very well all mean exactly the same thing. So when we talk about school-based testing, we're mostly talking about psychoeducational testing that includes academic and then also cognitive. So cognitive tests, we know cognitive is just the fancy word for thinking. So how do our kids think? And usually the tests for that that our kids are mostly having done are IQ tests. So the umbrella term of, say, psychoeducational testing would be, we have a snapshot of their reading, writing, their math, and then we have a sense of what their IQ is, the strengths and weaknesses in their learning profile. Now, all of this comes down to something you'll need to kind of know as we talk about all of this, is that, oh, just a little error there. When we are doing the testing, we're getting the results so that we can see if your child can be classified and receive special education services. Can they get help for their reading and writing and math and difficulties that they're having at school? So that's a classification. And I want to always point out the important point right from the beginning is that many times, I talk to parents and I ask them, like, when was their child diagnosed? And it might be ADHD or autism, it could be anything. And when I ask them, they usually say the school diagnosed my son 6 years ago. And I'm like, oh, okay. It's 9 times out of 10. It's almost 10 times out of 10. Most parents have thought that it was the school system that was diagnosing their kid. And so it's really important that we know that the testing that's done that's under the umbrella of school, anything that's done in the school building, cannot lead to a diagnosis. So think about diagnosis as something we all would need for our child. It is for, it would be done by an outside person. So maybe the pediatrician was involved, maybe there was a psychologist or a psychiatrist involved. All of those things are more under a medical umbrella, medical and mental health umbrella. So those are things that are outside of school. So that brings us to the point that we often need both. We often need the classification, right? So that the your kid can have services at school, but we also need to help the child outside of school. So that very well might be getting an evaluation so that there's a diagnosis and that can generate a treatment plan, right? So the treatment plan would be maybe because of the diagnosis, your child needs therapy. Maybe they need special tutors outside of school. Sometimes maybe they have to go to an occupational therapist. There's many different things that the medical side of this would drive that would be completely left out if we had only the one piece. So most times I would say we need to have school involved because we need our child to have help with the school and accessing their curriculum at school, but they also exist outside of school, right? Like, so they need to have the help outside. So many times we will go to, as a parent, you'll go to meetings and they will at the end say that your child might qualify for services. And it'll be a little confusing because they'll say it's based on um, autism as a category. So parents will hear the word autism and they'll say, okay, my child was just diagnosed with autism. And instead, what's really not made explicitly clear, I mean, I'm sure it's in all of the paperwork, the paperwork that's really, really hard to like decipher, right? So I'm sure it's in all of the procedural safeguards and information that's handed to us from the school, but we often don't know that really what happened during this process was just a classification was made, a classification saying that our child is, classified as having this category of disability. And so we're going to talk throughout tonight about how there's in parallel two different things that are going on that are almost always necessary to happen, and they happen in tandem, but one shouldn't replace the other. Um, we would not have help for the child in the school if we didn't have the school-based assessment. So they would never get classified. Our child would never have any kinds of extra services. And if we had a medical diagnosis only, if we had classification in school only, we would not have the diagnosis. So we would kind of miss the need for we would miss the need for the treatment that needs to happen outside of school. So these are those classifications are state and federal mandated, and so they are. As we're going to talk about as we do and try to understand testing, just know that it's done under the umbrella of laws that are guiding the process. And so when we talk about IEPs, for example, which testing usually might end up with the end result of meeting an IEP. It's all governed by it being a legal document. The IEP is a legal document, but also a legal process. So just know there's lots of rules and regulations around the process in which your child would become classified with one of the disability categories. So in tandem with knowing what these different types of testing are, we also kind of need to know who the players are. Like, who are these people? that are involved in the team. So we have the school psychologist, and that person is often doing a lot of the tests that are done when we're asking the school to evaluate our child. And there's also a special education teacher who is often doing another portion of the usually the academic testing. So for example, the school psychologist is often doing the um, IQ cognitive tests, for example, but the special education teacher may be doing the academic achievement tests. And then you have another member of the team that's really important, the speech and language pathologist, who helps identify the issues that are around actual speech, but also the use of speech. So the use of speech is, what we call pragmatic language, like how to use speech in back and forth conversation. For example, that's one of the major impairments in autism. So so speech and language is not involved just for articulation issues or difficulty speaking or not acquiring language at the developmental stage they should. It's in addition to that, how do we use language? Like how do our kids use language and have reciprocal back and forth conversation? So they're sometimes part of the team. And then there's also an occupational therapist that sometimes is part of the team. If there is anything related to your child that is like in the sensory area or the fine motor area or gross motor, actually, an occupational therapist would be part of the team. And then when we were just talking about those outside evaluations, there's these other people. So, and these people are separate. When you have outside evaluations, you'll have a licensed clinical psychologist that would maybe be doing the medical diagnosis on that end. And that person, oh, I think there was a little typo because there's a bullet missing. The last one was for the school-based was actually physical therapists. So physical therapists are also very much in tandem with occupational therapists and usually involved for the same reasons that, more gross motor issues. For example, if somebody has trouble walking, if they have a physical disability, so there are different reasons that an occupational and a physical therapist would work together on that team. So again, then just to the outside team, the outside evaluators, the licensed clinical psychologist is often the person that you bring your child to so that you can get a diagnosis that you need for medical reasons. So for example, if your child had autism, they would need to have a medical diagnosis on file so that insurance would be able to pay for services, especially things like ABA, ABA therapy. So, so sometimes if that medical piece is not done, services down the line that they need might not be able to be accessed. So that's another, kind of reason to have outside evaluations. One of the things that I want to point out is that it gets confusing that there's like we have 3 people here on the list already that have psychologist in the name. So it gets confusing, right? So a school psychologist is not a clinical psychologist. So, because I know the first question, I have these conversations with parents all the time. The first question they have is like, well, wait, my child already had an evaluation and by a psychologist at school. Why do I need anything else? And it is because the school psychologist is doing very much the academic end of things and have to do everything up until the point, the edge of where it becomes clinical. So sometimes I say that schools might be able to say that somebody walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, but they can't say it's a duck, right? Like they can't go to that next step of saying, okay, they can say, Johnny has trouble paying attention. Johnny jumps up and down and can't sit in his seat for classes, but they can't say, I know Johnny has ADHD and I am diagnosing him with that. So That's where the school psychologist and the clinical psychologist leaves off, right? So when there needs to be the diagnosis, the clinical psychologist on the outside of school makes that diagnosis. Then there's this third psychologist in the picture, right? Like, who's a neuropsychologist? Why do we need a neuropsychologist? That's somebody who is actually a licensed clinical psychologist. They do an extra year of like intense residency to learn neuropsychology evaluation. So neuropsych testing. They understand the brain very, very, very well. So they understand the biological basis of the symptoms that your child might have or the behaviors that your child might have. They can trace things back and also read medical data, like they can read CAT scan, MRI, PET scans. So they skirt into the medical arena. So if your child has a condition or suspect that your child has a condition that is medical in nature, they often would need to have an evaluation by someone who has neuropsychology training. And so that might be somebody who has a seizure disorder, someone who has cerebral palsy, things that are brain-based. Not that all of mental health is not brain-based, and all of the things that we're talking about, clearly are brain-based, but um, conditions that are truly like very biological in nature, and and there needs to be medical expertise to be able to interpret some of the data that's in the chart for your child. So when you're doing these outside clinical assessments, these last two people that we just talked about are usually the people that are involved. However, there's also psychiatrists and I mentioned before pediatricians. The reason I put psychiatrists on the list is because while we're talking about like who all these people are, it's important just to say like, okay, these are the players. And sometimes people get confused with a psychiatrist versus a psychologist. So the psychiatrist is somebody who might, at the end of a whole process, be able to tell you that somebody, needs to have a medication evaluation. And so that would be done by a medical doctor who is a psychiatrist. So keep this in mind as we talk. So what we want to know is that our kids are entitled to have a school-based evaluation. So if we have a suspicion that there is something, or if the school has a suspicion that there is something that's interfering with their learning, the first thing that is done is that a meeting is held, a PPT meeting, and testing is determined to, a list of tests are decided on to explore the areas of concern. And then it's decided based on that data whether they're eligible for the special education supports after that. So this is, again, like federal law required. What's important as we talk is I'll highlight like what can and cannot be addressed by these school-based evaluations. Keep in mind that schools are doing an eligibility evaluation, like I said before, not diagnostic. So eligibility, again, like I said before, is just going to say which disability category your child may fall into. In the resources at the end of the presentation, there's a slide that just shows you all the disability categories. So to know what the school is doing, I just want you to have a resource slide that explains the different types of assessments that you might see. So as a point of reference, academic achievement tests are just looking at how well they can read, write, and do math. I mentioned before the cognitive assessments. What is their IQ? What's the patterns of their strengths and weaknesses? And sometimes the assessments are also looking for learning disorders, which is the same as learning disabilities. We just use different terms. And sometimes they are doing questionnaires as well. I want you to know when you look at your reports which ones are objective tests and which aren't. The questionnaires are the ones that are the subjective opinions, and I'll highlight what those are in a minute. And then this is a resource slide to let you know the different kinds of assessments that the school can do. One is the occupational therapy evaluation that I mentioned. Another one is an assistive technology evaluation. So if you have a suspicion, or the team has a suspicion at school that that your child might benefit from having any kind of technology to help them, it might be being able to even use a calculator or type in the laptop. But are there different, there's many entire professions are built now on the amount of technology supports that exist for kids in school right now. So there's a ton of different options that can help bridge the gap for your child when they identify that there's, difficulty carrying something out. For example, they can't write fast enough to keep up with notes. Well, there's an assistive reader that's a pen that's collecting lecture notes as they're typing or as they're writing. There's just so many different things that make them better able to see the information, take the information in, even hear the information in the classroom. So when you're working with the team, the school team, you can ask them, is there anything that is, related to technology that might be able to help bridge the gap so that my child can be able to do their best in class? And sometimes schools will do an FBA, a functional behavior analysis. And that's when they come in and someone who is a BCBA comes in often and they observe the child in the classroom and they try to measure what's interfering with their learning. So it might be inattention, it might be hyperactivity, lots of different behaviors that they need to capture, measure, and then bring back to the team where together parents and the whole school team decide together with this data, what can we do to help address these issues that they find. And then I mentioned already what a speech and language evaluation is. So there's more than the one evaluation that's done. There's multiple days of testing, as you can tell, because there's so many different things involved. When a child's referred to see if they're eligible for special education, that first time that they're referred, they are really getting a full comprehensive evaluation. But it's definitely important for us, for everyone involved, for you to share the concerns that you have so that they don't miss any areas that need to be assessed. And then, like I said, a classroom observation is sometimes used. Sometimes it's a special education teacher as well who does that. And then just one quick moment, because it probably does not warrant any more than that, is that different from testing, I just don't want parents to be confused about what is testing and what's not testing. So there are these pieces of data that we receive, that parents will receive throughout the year, and these are not testing, but they are benchmark assessment tests. So those are outside of the special education process, but they get mentioned when you have a PPT meeting. The team will say to you, okay, well, the DRA reading level of your child is, you know, letter F, because they're not even numbers, they're letters. Every year, 3 times a year, in our local districts, we usually have the NWEA tests, and that is looking at their reading and their math. And then the SPEC, that's done in the state of Connecticut every year, 3rd through 8th grade. So those tests are for teachers to guide the teachers in placement into classes and for them to identify, because teachers are supposed to be monitoring kids to identify if they need to be referred into special education. But they really are able to help the teachers place them in classes. It can even help them have an indication that your student needs to be evaluated for giftedness too, because that's part of individualizing their education, is to see where their strengths are. And sometimes these benchmarks are catching that your kids might be like really far ahead in some areas, and they would do well to be challenged in those areas so they can continue to grow. So, not psychological testing is the point. Benchmark assessments are totally different, and teacher informed assessments, just for their purposes. So that would not be enough, if because I have heard many parents say that they thought their child was tested at school, but they mentioned these tests only, and these are just uh, quick assessments. So after there is a suspicion from a parent or a suspicion from the school, like a teacher, that your child needs to be evaluated to see if they need services, they call a PPT meeting, the planning and placement team meeting, and they review all of these assessment reports, right? So they have the meeting, they say there's concern, they agree to do the testing, and then they come back to the table, and parents are given a ton of information in these testing reports that are really confusing. Um, so one of the quick tips that I have for people right away is ask for a meeting before the meeting. So always ask for a meeting where you can review those reports that have the testing data before you actually go to the PPT, where they're going to make decisions based on that data. So the people who did those tests in the school are very familiar with it, can share what all of the different subtests mean and what was covered and not covered by the testing. And that is stuff that you cannot possibly all take in and quickly comprehend and be able to act on in a PPT meeting. So my best piece of advice for most parents is to make sure that they understand the testing before they walk into that room. And typically 2, 3 days, maybe sometimes only 1 day before the meeting, the tests, the summary of the tests are available in a report, and you can have somebody um, on the team review the results with you. And these are things that you just email the team, usually the point person that you've been working with during the testing process. And you have that person, you tell them in email that you're concerned that you won't have enough time to kind of understand all the testing, and you would like to have somebody go over it with you. They should say yes. But you get all of this data, right? It's confusing. I just want you to know it's not just you. It has been so confusing, even within the field of professionals, that they had to come out, the people who are in charge, or like the National Organization for Neuropsychologists, they had to come out with like a big statement saying like their agreement about what kind of language should we be using in our psych test reports, because everybody's using different terms and different definitions and different scores that mean something, that are not consistent across different tests. And it confuses the public, it confuses even the professionals. And so they have had to come up with some solutions for this because of that. So standardized scores, you probably hear this term a lot when you're getting your child's data. Just know the standardized scores are not always so standard. And I just wanted to show you this one example. Read this at your leisure, but just notice on the left, the same exact score on far right, the names of the tests are right there. The description of them are completely different. So you can be receiving a test where it says 75, and you see that your child performed poor, the description poor, and you're like, oh, what does that mean? It's a pretty strong word to say poor. They performed poorly, right? Um, but what does borderline mean? That won't automatically be clear to somebody. So no, the point is a 75 is not a 75 is not a 75. They are called very different things depending on what test you're actually having your child complete. So it is not just you. It is confusing within the field, and that's why you should feel completely empowered to ask questions. Other people may have the same questions. And just so you know, this is what the consensus is. And you might be surprised by this. So the accepted standard is that we should use percentiles, like pretend that there's 100 kids in the room and you break up those 100 kids. And so the exceptionally high at the top there, they scored higher than 98 of those 100 kids. That's their exceptional high score. 98 means they scored higher than 98 of the kids that are in a room with 100, right? So what is average though is really surprising often. So I just want to share, if you look across the yellow now, average is a huge range. So this is one of the things that gets very frustrating for parents and confusing for parents and others. If your score is average, it actually means that your score is somewhere between 25 and 75, like 50 points across of a range. 50 points is a large, big range. So what's in a name? Don't mean to go Shakespeare on you for a second, but what's in a name? It does matter what we call this. So there's no better way for the tests to say that they are average. So we are left to interpret and not just gloss over whether our kids are in the average range, because the average means that the majority of kids actually are in the average range. So how far outside of it are our kids, and are they shifting and becoming less and less lower average, basically? So we need to not gloss over when the test results say that a child is giving, performing at an average level. Don't let this hurt your brain. I always say that like numbers and stats like scare people and give them headaches, but I just want you to have this for reference for the future. It's actually something that's handed out very often when you have parent-teacher meetings, if you're going over test data, and it's just so that you have on one sheet where it says it's yellow at the bottom. I just want you to see between 25 and 75, that is a whole lot of people. Like if you could see my cursor where the dark gray is and it's circling, that's a whole lot of people that are average. But there's a lot of wiggle room within there that they could be sliding. And so we have to be careful that our kids aren't sliding. We don't want to find out when they're already in the very low range, right? Early intervention would dictate that if we could get to them sooner, there's less to fix, there's less to remediate. We really need to help them sooner. So I don't like this graph because it's very like clinical. I like thinking about this as there's people under this graph, right? These are people, our kids. I wish they had little icons of kids, but these are our kids that are under this curve that are in the 25 to 75 percentile. So if you are in the 25th percentile, you're where this arrow is. Everything to the right represents 75% of the rest of scores. So if you're in the average range, you could have 75% of the kids ahead of you. So think about the experience your child might be having. They might have 75% of people around them getting it before they understand it, doing better on the tests, performing at a much higher level, and they're still considered average. So the mental health impact of being in a room surrounded by people that are all 10 steps ahead of you can be devastating. And when we think about the anxiety and the mental health issues that kids have, a lot of this is that they are perceiving things that are happening for them, that there's a bunch of kids that are outperforming them, and they're very acutely aware of that. So while you're in this range, do we wait for you to continue to slide, or do we try to look at the data trends early? And that's why I want people to be more confident looking at the numbers in their test data. So the data that we're given I'm putting a lot of emphasis on the fact that the data are numbers and that they should actually be percentiles. But unfortunately, a lot of the data, when we come together in the school team, we're sometimes just reviewing data that's not normal data, not IQ tests. They are often questionnaires. And it's just looking at like, how do our kids compare to others? And you really can't compare or monitor progress with their academics or their behavior based on a questionnaire, because it's not standardized. So I'll give you some examples of this. There's probably not a single parent that has not seen, or if you go back and read the report, you'll see it now. There are two questionnaires that are often always included in psychological testing. That's the psycho-ed testing that's done in schools, the brief and the BASC. So these are opinion, perception-based questionnaires, and a lot of stock is put in them. And so I just want you to know what it's actually measuring. It's not measuring, so the brief is not, it's a measure of executive functioning, but it's asking parents and teachers, what do you think? Do you think that they're good with organizing their stuff? Do you think that they're good with emotional regulation? All of these things that they are subjectively giving their opinion, and the descriptions of the results are things like, the scores are mildly elevated or potentially clinically elevated or clinically elevated. They're terms that are not the same as, measuring severity in a standardized way. These are the test makers that made up their own descriptions of what they would classify concerns that parents and teachers have about the kid. And the BASC is the same thing. It's asking a bunch of stuff that has to do actually with things like ADHD and oppositional defiant disorder and conduct problems. Parents, teachers are all filling these questionnaires out, and their results are, giving you results like, well, the child is at risk for a certain problem. The child is clinically significant for this symptom. Those are not things that are clinical diagnoses. So it's very interesting for it to be even called clinically significant in these cases, because they're not clinical measures. They're not done by clinicians, and they're not interpretable as a diagnosis. So it's a lot of misnomers. So when we have these the data that comes in our psych test reports, we have to be clear and know when, and just ask the question, is this objective information? And I already mentioned how often reading scores are just a letter. So what do you interpret with a letter? You really have to ask something more meaningful, like, okay, well, letter F in the DRA chart, is that grade level? Like, you have to ask follow-up questions to really be able to interpret it. So it's not based on percentiles, and percentiles are the only structured way to, across tests, be able to communicate the same consistent categories of information. So when we have this other types of data presented to us, it can confuse things, and it leads sometimes astray, leads us to sometimes be confused about whether something has been diagnosed by the school staff, because they're asking about clinical symptoms and then using terms like clinically elevated. So some advocacy things, like I said, first, ask for objective tests that measure the areas that you're concerned about. 100%, if I could put this on a t-shirt and have every parent wear it to a PPT meeting, I would. I would say, ask for objective tests that measure this. Subjective tests are the ones that are asking about the opinions, and they're not normative data. And you can't use it for progress monitoring. So I wanted you to know, so did you know, there's actually objective tests for things like measuring attention. And so very often what this current system is within a school-based system, primarily, are The tests of attention are asking parents and teachers, do you think that they're inattentive? And do you think that they're having a hard time sitting still? Those are their opinions, but there actually are tests that measure the ability of a child to sit still, okay, and to resist impulses to do things in an objective testing condition. And so these are, some examples. These are probably the most standard that are out there, but I'm sure that there's additional ones as well. So if it comes up that somebody's, talking about your child having trouble with attention, it's perfectly valid, and it is highly encouraged that you ask, are they able to include objective tests during that testing process? And another very common area of concern for parents are this collective category of executive functioning. So there are objective tests that, often these questionnaires say, like, is your child disorganized? Do they often lose their homework? All the different kind of like problem solving and poor planning and organization and those kinds of attention skills. Those things we usually just are asking opinion and getting that as the result in the testing. But we can actually put something in front of a child in a clinical assessment and watch them whether they can problem solve a situation, and see whether they can remember information and perform well on a memory test, for example. You can see their planning and their problem solving by how they carry out the tasks that a psychologist or a neuropsychologist would be using. So these things exist, and it's just important that we don't, that it's part of our advocacy that at the PPT we can be asking for these things. Another additional advocacy tip is to ask for progress monitoring. So after a child is already, receiving services, we want to make sure that we know that they're monitoring, that it's able to get better. Are the goals using objective measures that we can track over time? And ask them, please feel always free to ask them, what do the numbers mean? And you can ask the question, how will I know if this is, what are the trends in the data that we're looking at? For example, how will we know if the interventions that are in the IEP are actually working? I know that's implied, right? Like that's an implied question, but it's not stated. And because of that, it's often not getting into IEPs or the discussion of what should go into an IEP. How will we monitor the data over time other than opinions about how things are going? So when it comes to data trends, I want to point out that you always want to be comparing apples to apples, not apples to oranges, right? So if you can put something in a chart, so you have testing that's done every year, right? Like you can see that, certain tests that have been repeated, whether they're declining, whether there's a trend there that you see that they're kind of going up and down. One trend that's very common to see is that in the fall, testing in those benchmark assessments are often lower because they're coming out of the summer slide. They've not been in school mode for the last couple months. So that's an expected one. But for your child, what are the different things that you're seeing? And the goal is to try to put it into a chart. So when you receive the reports, there's data tables, there's sometimes just written in the paragraphs, the summary. And one of the things that you can ask is for help to graph the data. And it's a perfectly reasonable thing. And as an active participant, who is encouraged to be involved in the PPT process and with the school team, it's expected and encouraged that you ask questions that are active like that. It is absolutely fine to do that. So I'm going to give you this example. Don't let your head hurt. I always say when you see numbers, don't freak out. So just going to point something out that I mentioned before, and it's just the numbers that demonstrate what I said before. So if you have a test that is repeated because the area of concern, for example, in this case, was someone's reading scores. So the test is called the GORT, and it's an oral reading test. So it is repeated by the schools at different intervals. If it hasn't been repeated in a year, you can ask for it to be repeated so that you can use it for progress monitoring. So this is a child who, if you look at, like I always say, the percentiles, right? Percentiles were 37 across the board. So that's way more than the 25 that gets you into the average range, right? So they're not concerned about the child. Basically, like nobody's concerned, average, everything's fine. So then the next year, they slide down to the next level down, and it was just one standard score, but it put them to the cusp of the average range. By the time this person came to me in private practice, it was the third year, and their scores were all below average. So what we had was a trend that just hadn't been recognized for 3 years, that the average, I'm using air quotes, average scores were declining every year that the child was in school. So when we receive data, we have to make sure that we ask, what does it mean that they're in the average range? Where in the average range are they falling? And where were they last time we looked at it? Because if we see that they're declining, that's when the indication is you have to turn up the heat with interventions. You have to be able to give a stronger or more frequent dose, essentially, of intervention to be able to help make sure it doesn't become a landslide, right? Where you're just in the average, low average, and keep declining from there. So this was one example. I'm going to tell you, one dad, he deserves a lot of credit. I couldn't believe he did this. It's a type of graph I never even really see. So don't freak out. This is called a radar graph. So what he did was he was absolutely convinced that there was something wrong. He knew that his child had dyslexia. The school didn't think that she did. And it was really interesting. He didn't know much at all about psych tests, but he was definitely a data-minded person. And he put all the different kinds of tests, because these were standardized tests. This is why it's good to have standardized tests, right? You can compare apples to apples. He took different measures of different aspects of reading and processing of language all together on a graph. And what he tried to indicate here was that in this bullseye, see this black circle in the middle, that is where it says right here, that's the 50th percentile. So everything should be above that. Nothing should be in the center bullseye. So nothing should be, there or even declining and getting worse in there. So in these red circles right here, he found very clearly across multiple tests that all the core components that go into a dyslexia diagnosis, it was hitting criteria for that. So word reading, decoding, reading accuracy, and actually, reading fluency right next to it is not circled, but it's at 25, just about a hair away from being outside of that average range, right? So he was looking across all these tests and saying, what does all this data mean? And to his credit, he was like, I need to make sense of what they're giving me. This is not at all what I would expect anybody to be doing or trying to do on their own. But it just is just really interesting to see that you can pull standardized data, put it together, and see what's falling below the 25th percentile for your child. And the data will tell a story. It'll absolutely tell a story. So if you go to a private psychologist outside of school and you bring the data, because other people can look at the psych test reports, this doesn't need to be just you. There's teams that you build for yourself. When you have somebody that reviews it with you, you can say, I don't know how to make sense of this, but I see the outcome is that my kid cannot do math, or my kid can't read, or whatever it is that you as a parent have this strong feeling that you know that it's getting worse for your kid, you can bring the data and ask somebody to review it. So you can ask the person who's the point person at your school, usually it's a case manager at your child's school, if they have an IEP, and say, can you help me just put this together and see, are we seeing progress? So if we do this math competency test each year, do we see a table that looks like this, where everything is sliding lower and lower in the average range and then low average or below average? Or can I be okay? Can I be reasonably reassured that I can breathe and know that they're making progress? Can you help me figure that out? And so there's the school team that can help you make sense of that. There's ambitious parents that do this on their own. And also there's outside evaluators that you can go to. And sorry, I lost my cursor. So the whole reason why we would want to do this is because we don't collect data for data's sake, right? Like just for the heck of it. There's no point in testing our kids if we don't do something with the results. And that started with our prior slides, which was we have to know what the data actually said. So we have to make sure we understood what it said. Is there reason for concern? And what are we going to do about it? So when we go back to the PPT and we're around the table with the school team, what can we ask to help move the conversation towards what are we going to do about this? What's the action plan for this? What I've been mentioning over and over really is that parents deserve to have someone explain the results of the testing to them in plain language. The team is one option for that. And in addition to that, there's the outside evaluations. So private evaluations are having an outside evaluator help you, like a clinical psychologist or a neuropsychologist. They can reassess, they can assess areas that were not assessed yet. And they can also, do what is included in the school-based assessment, but they can also do the additional part. So the school-based assessment is just guiding the school plan. And I do not mean the word just. They are helping to guide the school plan, but it can only go so far and it can't diagnose. So it can't guide treatment. And many of the things that are being evaluated are indicators that our child might need treatment for something. And so outside intervention, outside specialists, outside people and experts and specialists to help the child. So I want to stop and just kind of say that the school-based assessment is going to guide the program. And what usually happens is you go back to the table, the PPT table, and the results are given, and it could feel like a passive process. And mostly because parents might not know how to contribute or what questions to ask during those meetings. And so I think the emphasis here is that you may need somebody to help you even craft what the questions are. And that can be anybody, because you are allowed to bring anybody to your meetings. You're allowed to bring your best friend. It could be, I highly recommend the spouses go together. Spouses, co-parents, they go together. It is very helpful for both sets of ears to hear the information and be able to then have meaningful conversation outside of the PPT meetings, where they can, the co-parents, the parents can talk to each other and say, I didn't understand this one part. What do you think we should be doing about this other part? And all of the explanation that was given to both of you, you'll find that you can, together piece together, like, oh, I understood this part, but I really didn't understand this part. And you can help each other with what, you can meet in the middle with what you might have missed. So it's great to have another set of ears. It's a very unified front to have parents that are both that involved, that they're interested in being at the table there together. Um, you always want to avoid that there is any possibility that you could be construed as just nervous about your child. And so I think that it brings some like confidence to have the person with you by your side who's your person, to give you that moral support during that time so that you can kind of stay calm. I think the number one thing that I hear from parents about PPTs, and I experience it myself, is that being in the room is a tense situation. It is high stakes. It is very difficult to understand all of the language and everything that's going on around you. It's easy to feel intimidated, and it's very easy to feel emotional in a way where you choose not to speak because you feel like if you speak, you're going to cry. And I can't tell you how many people cry in PPTs. And it's a parent shared experience. It is something that just happens because it is so hard to go through those meetings. And so having somebody there and somebody to hear the other information and to be able to kind of like talk together about what questions to ask, and you prepare together for what questions to ask at the meeting, there's nothing better than that. That's the most prepared that you could possibly be. We can't go through an IEP school, right? And learn everything there is to know about absolutely everything you'll need in these meetings. But what you will have is you'll have guidance about where to go if you don't have all the information at those meetings, and you'll have each other to be able to come together to discuss. So the other piece that I want to say about evaluations before we do questions is that the evaluations are going to guide goals and objectives. And one of the things that I didn't mention, besides test results that are very dense and difficult to read and understand, is once you know what the test results are and you know that there's a problem that needs to be addressed. The next piece is, well, what do you do with the information to provide a goal that that your child will be able to master the goals that are about these identified issues. I think that probably 9 out of 10 parents that I've spoken to don't realize that they actually can contribute goals. They can come to the meetings with goals. They can say, I don't know maybe what the language needs to be written, but I want this to be something that our child is working on. That's related to, reading or writing or math or their emotional, social emotional development. Those goals we're not meant to be passive recipients as a parent of those goals. And your child is not meant to be a passive recipient of a process that they're not involved in. And so I also want to point out that if your child is 12, 13, 14, as of 14, they have to be involved or offered the chance to come to the meetings, but even younger, have them come to the first 10 minutes, meet the team, be part of the process, and gaining the confidence to be, for you as parents, gaining the confidence to be in those meetings and advocate for the child. It's also important for your child to see that and for the child to learn self-advocacy and how do you ask about the issues that they are living with, they are experiencing, and they can provide really good context for the team about what happens. Like, why is it that maybe they can perform well in one class and not in another? They might have the insight that all of us as the adults in the room never thought of because they're living it. So this kind of hiding in plain sight information is something that we really want to make sure that we don't forget, that we make sure that we have other input that's not just specialists, but actually, I saw on online this week that there's a t-shirt that says, "I'm the I in IEP." And it's a kid wearing the t-shirt, right? And that's the part that we don't want to lose sight of. They are often very insightful about what it functionally looks like. They might not know the fancy label or what the meaning of their test results were, but they'll know for sure, I don't get it. When they start to talk about math, I am checked out. I pretend I need to go to the bathroom. I'm just not in that room anymore. Whether I can get out and run out of the room, I will. I will go to the nurse. There's all the insight will come from them. They will be able to say, this is where I'm struggling. And so we don't want to forget the most important piece is that our kids are not just data, and we have to be able to involve them in the process. So I just want to skip ahead to one thing, and then I'm going to go to the questions in the Q&A. So one thing is, first of all, my contact information. These are some of the like one-stop shopping best places for getting information about how to understand testing and the whole even IEP process. And then don't let this confuse you, but I just wanted to point out there's a few reference slides. So this one is the first one. If you're ever looking for like, well, what can a neuropsych eval do versus a psychological evaluation versus a psycho-ed evaluation, the three hubs, should have made them red. I think, Eve, before I send this out, I'm going to change the color of the middle of these.
Okay.
So this psychological evaluation that a clinical psychologist does on the outside, what are they addressing? These are the hubs. These are the spokes. These are the things. This is what it looks like. And the psycho-ed that we talked about that's happening in the school. What is the scope and what are the recommendations look like? And then why would you need to have this neuropsych? What might be additional that's different from the other two? Might be the reason that you go for a neuropsych, because there's different insights. For example, like looking at brain behavior connections. So there's, three big categories and lots of detail about them that didn't mean to make your brain hurt, but I just wanted to have this as a resource slide for you to know. And I just pointed out, these are the different reasons that your child might qualify for an IEP. I am very happy to say that they have officially changed the category emotional disturbance to emotional disorders. I'm very happy that they don't use that horrible term anymore. And then some of the things that you may be wondering if you're at the very early stage of evaluations and wanting to know, like, what happens once you ask the school for an evaluation to be done. This comes up so often as a question that I actually left it as a slide for you to see specifically there. All right. So those were the things I wanted you to know.
Thanks, Mary. Everybody, so I have been answering a number of questions that were asked. And I've also given a number of people my email address, eve@spednet.org, if there are follow-ups for those type of questions. These are questions that didn't seem to be for Mary. And then there are the ones for Mary. Here we go. What about intellectual disability? I know that it is not just based on IQ score. What else is needed? What if there are other factors like ADHD, vision and speech, communication concerns? Are the IQ scores valid if there are other factors? There's a lot of questions in that question.
There is definitely a lot. You know what? That is real life, though. I talked about things in isolation, but in real life, somebody has multiple concerns, multiple diagnoses, multiple issues, and it makes the assessment process more complicated. So there's more spokes, right, in the different directions that need to be assessed. So for intellectual disability, you're right, it's not just based on IQ, it's also based on function, how well somebody is functioning. like adaptive behavior, like how well they're able to take care of themselves in terms of like they're called ADLs, but grooming and showering and feeding themselves and all of the things that we do to care for our bodies. So are they able to function in those categories? Um, and then they very often, most people actually, uh, most people don't get through life with just the one uh, diagnosis. So when you have multiple, it's not invalid. Like the IQ scores are not invalid if they have other issues. If they have vision problems, for example, there are adaptations to the IQ tests. I have a colleague who's a specialist in this, working with people who are deaf, for example. So if you are blind or you're deaf, if you have very significant reasons why you cannot see the materials or hear the materials in an IQ test, there's adaptations of the test for that. And the other things like ADHD and speech and communication, it just means more people are added to your team. And there's more evaluations. There's speech and language person, and there likely should be a clinical psychologist or a neuropsychologist in that case. Hopefully that addresses that a little bit.
Okay. Is there an objective test to replace the BASC? Can you suggest others to replace it?
So I have to say that BASC covers so many different things. So the behaviors, like I mentioned, like ADHD, I mentioned earlier on one of the slides that there's objective tests for ADHD. That would be a better substitute for the BASC, if that's your concern, if ADHD is the reason why you're doing the BASC in the first place. So it matters what the specific concern is. A good clinical interview with a clinical psychologist or a neuropsychologist is actually a very effective way to figure out if somebody has a diagnosis rather than any questionnaire. So I would definitely recommend doing that. But back to that slide, you might find the answer to this a little bit more. If the concern was ADHD, if the concern was executive functioning, I provided some examples of the objective measures that would be in those categories.
Okay. Thank you, Mary. My high schooler has been diagnosed with ADHD and anxiety. She has a 504 plan. What would her benefit be if she had an IEP? Oh, that's a really important question.
Absolutely. I feel like Eve, we should talk about this together. Um, so tell me if I missed something. My first answer is that a 504 is something that is not legally enforceable. So it doesn't get in, it doesn't have to be enforced. So if you have a child that it's going well and the teachers are following it and all the teachers are aware of it, because often, kids are going to different classes. They can have 9 different teachers in one day, depending on what grade level you're at. So if the teachers are implementing the accommodations that are in the 504, and if there are meaningful accommodations in the 504, because often they're a little sparse, they're not as detailed. Those would be reasons, if that's going well, a 504 is adequate because it's going well. If you find that it's not assisting enough, that's when we get into IEP land, right? Like that's when we try to figure out what we can do that's additional. And then, because a key difference between a 504 and an IEP is that the 504s don't have goals and objectives. So you don't have a specific plan or goals or someone monitoring the plan and the implementation of the help that's in the 504 document. So if the 504 has not been enough, there is really the possibility of just making it a more robust, right? Like robust 504. Because sometimes it just lists a couple of things like your child's getting extra time for tests or something. It's often not detailed. And it could be that more is added to it. But I'm a very strong proponent of early intervention and not letting too much time for response to intervention and RTI and SERBI to take place before acting, because it's your kid's learning loss during that time. Eve, would you say there's
Yeah,
anything
well,
else?
IDEA is an education entitlement statute, and 504 is a civil rights non-discrimination statute. So an IEP is going to give you individualized and specialized instruction and be able to be much more individualized. If your child has, I mean, yes, what you said was correct about if the child's needs are being met under a 504 plan, that's great. But many times, more often than not, a child with ADHD is going to, and anxiety, because ADHD doesn't live alone, it runs with other disabilities, especially sensory integration and anxiety and sometimes depression. There are going to be many more needs that need to be met, and that could be met better under an IEP than under a 504 plan. You really have to watch the 504 plan. I mean, I used to go and bring the 504 plan, in my hand to the different teachers to make sure that they read it, because oftentimes they just don't get it. In IEPs, I would do the same thing and make sure they had the IEP plans, but the IEPs generally follow the child much, much better. Teachers know that they have to check the IEP. So if a child can get an IEP and be classified under OHI, which is where ADHD lives, I would always go for that instead of a 504 plan.
I 100% agree. Yeah.
What rights does one have to object to the classification of the disability?
That is a very interesting question. I have seen this happen kind of often. So you only have one primary category. So your child might have multiple categories of concerns, but the primary is what they've chosen, a different primary, perhaps. And sometimes it matters because it really is a document that travels with your child, and the teachers are seeing them through that lens as that primary disability. So if it is off the mark and it is not capturing what somebody as a teacher in a snapshot should know about your kid, it's worth objecting. And there's only a couple of things that sometimes don't automatically get classified, like dyslexia is one.
I think Connecticut just added dyslexia category instead of just specific learning disability. Yeah,
Yes.
so it's not, dyslexia is a Connecticut category, not a federal category. So that's a good thing for living in Connecticut. ADHD, of course, is under other health impaired, which is problematic for many reasons.
Yeah, it's like kind of a catch-all
Yeah.
category, makes sense. So yes, you have the right to.
In your opinion, how qualified are most school psychologists to evaluate a child's IQ? Have you ever seen when the child's IQ score is dramatically different in school-based versus clinical evaluations?
So honestly, I think it's something that schools do really well. I think that there are certain things that are like squarely fall in the domain of the schools and the training of the school psychologists. So they spend all their days doing testing. They're not, providing counseling and guidance. That's the guidance counselor today. So, or the school counselor. So school psychologist is doing testing and writing reports all day. They are very immersed in doing academic achievement testing and IQ testing. The only disclaimer I would give is if you have a child that is in that borderline range of IQ where it's on the border of intellectual disability or disorder, and you want to make sure that I have to say every point counts when there is a qualification for disability benefits in the future for them. And some people, you want to make sure that it has been like the person who is the most experienced. And that might be that your school psychologist is a very well qualified person, but you would not want in a very tenuous situation like that to have so much at stake and somebody who's brand new. So you would want to look at what the experience level is. And that's something that I actually encourage parents to do. It's something we would think to ask our surgeon if our kid was having surgery, right? But sometimes we don't think to ask, like, how long has a person been on the staff, just to get a sense of their the experience level. And everything is very public domain today. You can see if your school psychologist has been, I think they're certified through the Department of Education, and you can look up when did they get their their licensure for that. You can look up anything today.
Um, have, have you seen, the child's IQ score dramatically different
No,
between girls? Okay.
no, no.
When a child continuously tests below average on benchmarks and is told he or she needs services, but we have more students with greater need, oh my gosh,
Ooh.
what should you say? That's not an answer.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's a good answer to say. That's not an answer. So the answer can't be that we don't have the ability to provide the service. The answer needs to be that the child requires a service regardless of their ability to have enough staff to do it or money to implement the service. So that is something that you have to object to. Um, we should not, parents should not be told that. Not at all. It's not okay.
No. Are there recommended tests for those with significant intellectual disabilities that are nonverbal? They also have level 3 ASD. The school has difficulty getting reliable scores oftentimes. Mhm.
Oh, I would definitely have outside evaluator do that. That's a complicated one. So in that case, I would take back my prior answer to the person where I would have somebody who's very experienced on the outside as an outside evaluator, because there are adaptations of all of the of all of the psychological tests that can be done. So for someone who's nonverbal, that is a very nuanced situation that they need to be able to get the data, and that might not be a very big part of their training. So someone on the outside would have that training though.
Mhm. And the school might actually say that.
Yeah,
Will say that they don't have anyone who could do that and like having an independent educational eval, have
yeah,
somebody else do it, who's independent. Can
absolutely.
medical, oh, I'm sorry. Can medical 504 plans based on anxiety and ADHD be just as effective in helping the child if they don't qualify for an IEP? For example, they have no academic issues, just social emotional, or is there something that's somewhere between a 504 and an IEP? No, there's nothing in between them. And I didn't mean to imply before that everyone needs an IEP. I mean, if a 504 meets the needs of the child, then that's absolutely a perfect instrument to have. It's just that oftentimes they don't, and they need better, more specific goals and objectives and recommendations that an IEP can provide. But Mary, go ahead with this question.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. There's one reading between the lines thing that I see in this question that I'm wondering. I think that it's important for people to not accept this answer that they do not need an IEP when there's just social emotional needs. When social emotional, so there's all IEP goals have categories, and one of them is social emotional. So sometimes people have an IEP and only have a social emotional goal, and it's really just a misnomer that it's not affecting other classes. It's often something that's pervasive and either is or will be at some point interfering with their ability to do their coursework in class.
Is sensory processing disorder an official diagnosis? And what type of services or specialist would a child see for this?
So unfortunately, it's not an actual DSM diagnosis that mental health professionals use. Um, Neither is executive functioning disorder, and it comes up a lot, those two things. But those are things that are sidecars. They go in tandem with other things that the person probably does have as a diagnosis. And so they very often will go to an occupational therapist as the first line, and that person will do a very good evaluation and help you in the beginning of guiding a plan for bringing recommendations to the school team so that they could have services or see if they need a 504 or an IEP based on it.
Mhm.
But yeah,
So
OT.
oftentimes somebody with a kid with ADHD is going to have sensory processing disorder,
Yes.
almost all the time.
Yes.
And oftentimes they will have an independent occupational therapy evaluation, or that the school occupational therapist will do an occupational therapy evaluation. You know, for my kid, the outside occupational therapist and the school-based occupational therapist work together, because a lot of times with sensory processing disorder, there needs to be a home piece.
Right.
And so the parent will be like a brushing protocol or some kind of sensory
Mhm.
diet that the school and the independent occupational therapist will work together on, that will be able to be implemented at home. So it's an important diagnosis, whether or not it's official.
And that might be OHI, right? Like they might classify the person as OHI if they have sensory issues, and
Yeah.
but yeah, they'll still get help.
Uh, From the point of view of someone who used to do the academic testing for a school system, our PPTs always went better when the evaluation reports were sent out to parents in advance of the PPT. Oh, yes. Parents can ask for this. Also, it definitely helps to hold an informal meeting between evaluators and parents to discuss and go into detail. Yes, absolutely. It's vital, though, to avoid making any decision outside the PPT. The question, is it reasonable for a parent to request or insist on a specific academic test? Oh, for example, a GORT rather than
Woodcock
W,
Johnson. Yeah.
yeah, Woodcock Johnson 3.
So
Thank
yes,
you
but not.
for that initial piece of
Yeah.
information.
So the word insist is the one I would leave out, but request, absolutely. I've done it myself, honestly. You can ask a specific area and even a specific test. And that's part of the conversation and collaboration and meaningful participation to, you've done some research to have investigated and known that there are some tests that pick up a specific thing that you think your child needs. And so talking that through with the team is very important to do, and they're welcome to hear that, but they may not do it because the word insist can't be the case. You can't make it happen. you know Very reasonable to ask, though.
What types of objective tests are there for ASD, for
So,
autism disorder?
oh yeah, sorry. Autism spectrum disorder, there's kind of like two mainstay tests that are done. The ADOS and the MIGDAS come to mind first, and they include objective measures, performance. They're carrying out certain tasks, which makes it objective and based on observation directly from a clinician. So those are very good.
So there are two questions that have to do with similar things. One, where do we find and how do we choose an appropriate neuropsychologist for an evaluation for a 7-year-old? And do you have a list of recommended licensed clinical psychologists?
Oh.
So, the answer to that one is no, but Psychology Today is
Hmm.
often a very good place to look. And you
Yes.
can find out a lot of information about the people who are in there. Um,
Yes.
as far as choosing an appropriate neuropsychologist, what do you think, Mary?
I was going to say, you guys belong to a village. You are a village of parents, and it's very common for parents to share information with other parents. And so people who are in your region and have good reputations become known to you by talking to other parents and by sharing um, in groups like special education parent Facebook groups are good for that. And it's not medical advice or anything like that. It's just you know what experience have other people had with the same people, and I think that that's one place to go. But it's funny, Eve, I would have said the exact same thing. I always go to Psychology Today. It's my go-to for most things.
Yeah, because there are a bunch of Facebook folks, those of you who are sending me questions but not doing it through the Q&A, they disappear on the screen. So I just have to stop for a second and say that we've been getting a number of questions that just pop up and then disappear. So please, if you have questions, please type them into the Q&A. Now I forgot where
Uh,
we were. I'm sorry. Where were we, Mary?
after an evaluation, how do you push for an IEP if they come back with a 504?
Oh, yeah, but I thought we were talking about Psychology Today. And I was gonna
Oh,
say that there are a lot of Facebook groups out there, by, parents of kids with disabilities, Wilton parents of kids. I mean, I don't know what they all are, but I know that there are many of them, Facebook groups, and a lot of what goes on there is discussion of, I've used this doctor, what do you think of this doctor? And it is excellent to get specifics when you talk to parents and make sure you're getting good information instead of, someone just being upset because of some particular thing that they did. It's hard. Yes, after an evaluation, how do you push for an IEP if they come back with a 504 plan?
so some pushback is reasonable, some pushback is not. So if there has not been an intervention plan that's been tried, it may be reasonable for a 504 to be implemented first and see the response to it. If there's been a lot of RTI, a lot of they're doing this tier intervention in class and they've been doing it for over a year. And, I've heard parents talk about their kids languishing in response to intervention for years. So if that is the situation, you do push back, and the how in that part would be making your concerns known to the supervisor of pupil services in the school, and you may need to have an advocate to go with you as well. But the collaborative approach would definitely be the best way to say that use data, look, this has been tried, and for this amount of time, this is not something that we can afford to wait any longer. And after that collaboration, if that kind of conversation doesn't move the needle, it's kind of going to the next person, the supervisor of the person that you're speaking to, and then after that, an advocate.
And I don't know what you mean by an evaluation, because maybe if you're talking about a school evaluation, maybe what you want to do is get a clinical, a medical diagnosis, and then you have the diagnosis, and then you bring it back to the school, and so you have an actual ADHD diagnosis or an autism diagnosis, and that then puts the kid in one of the IDEA categories for an IEP.
Excellent. That's exactly right. Absolutely, 100% agree.
But if the parents object to the disability classification, does the school have to change the designation? We are in a situation where we objected and the school has not acted to change.
Oh, this is a
Right,
repeat
and
because he
this
got
is the
kicked off. Okay.
right. Okay, sorry, I asked this earlier, but was kicked off. I can't see the response. Okay.
So no, they don't have to change the designation. The part I said before that was important, I think, about this is that um, I'm not sure how much it matters if it drives the entire intervention plan and what goals and objectives you choose. Then yes, that's something to bring back to the table. And this is a point that I wish everybody would know. Actually, is that if the answers have not been clear enough and there hasn't been enough discussion to satisfy the concerns that you have, you ask for another meeting. You do not wait for an annual review. You don't have to wait any length of time. You can request a PPT the day after a PPT was not successful. You can request discussion at any time. So barring that, if the classification really does matter, then you would continue to go and continue to go and move forward, because if they're not acknowledging it, then it's not being addressed in the goals and objectives. If it is the other case, though, just know I said in the last time that the primary disability category does not have to be, it's just the primary. They might be acknowledging the other disability, but just not classifying it because they only are supposed to classify one. They're not acknowledging the others, though.
Because the recommendations are going to also
Yeah.
discuss recommendations for other things outside of the specific, like we were talking about with ADHD and sensory issues.
Yep. Exactly.
Our daughter is classified as with multiple disabilities on her IEP. Should we push for specific classifications? Is multiple disabilities putting her in the best possible scenario for the longer term? I thought multiple disabilities is a category. Isn't it one of the categories on the IEP?
Yeah. So
Yeah, it is.
yeah, so she's just wondering, like,
Is a
should it be
category.
more specific? Yeah, should it be more specific? So sometimes schools don't feel that there is a specific primary disability because they're kind of equally weighted in their mind. So for example, they might feel that they have problems with reading, writing, and math, and so they're going to classify um, a specific learning disorder and not specify a certain type of learning disorder. OHI is a very broad category. That's not specific at all. And I don't even know the stats on this, but I would say like the majority of people have that category as their classification. So the specificity is not as important. Um, it just matters what's in the IEP. So if they're addressing the concerns that you have and that the child has, what we call it is less important as the classification.
Here's another one also. I have heard that multiple disabilities is not a recommended classification. If a child is impacted equally by more than one diagnosis, is there a recommended way to state this on the IEP?
So how to reconcile? I don't know, Eve, have you heard how to reconcile? If I'm surprised it's not something that's come up for me before.
I'm sorry, I
But
don't know.
I don't know that either.
However, if you want to email me that question, I can definitely look into it for you. So just send me at info@spednet.org or eve@spednet.org, and I will talk to another attorney about it. Is there specific testing for girls with autism?
Yeah, well, I answered too quickly. It's a very known profile that it's different. It's very well known amongst professionals that the symptoms that we see, we don't miss as we used to miss because we know what to look for. But there's not an actual different test. So like they would still get the ADOS or the MIGDAS. They would get the same evaluations, but they're not hiding in plain sight anymore. You know, the professionals are really good about knowing how to assess them now.
Mary, what type of evaluations do you do? Is
Oh.
the question neuro or clinical psychology?
So I do clinical psychology, and my areas have always been, as you know from these prior webinars, ADHD and executive functioning and all the wonderful things that come with ADHD, like anxiety. And so a lot of the referral questions that I get are, you know, actually the number one thing is, does my child have ADHD? Um, and basically, you know, do they need a 504 or an IEP? And so the recommendations that go to schools, and I go to PPTs to present the findings and say, this is what we think is going on. And that seems to be one of the top areas that parents are concerned about, and schools, you know, don't initially know what to do. You know, sometimes it's really hard that ADHD can seem like within the range of child or adolescent behavior, you know. So that's mostly the kinds of assessments that I do.
There are a lot of questions here.
Yeah, I know. I was just
Not
thinking.
sure how, uh, let's do a few more and see what we can do. How does eligibility for ESY work? So that's another presentation about extended
Right.
school year.
Right. So extended school year is, you know, the summer school piece of someone's IEP. And so they will determine whether your child is needing services in order to maintain, not gain, but maintain and not have significant losses over the summer. You would think that some fancy calculation goes into this and we have a crystal ball to know who's going to need this or not, but it largely is not. It's more opinions of whether they think that the child will be okay and not have too much loss over the summer that needs to be made up for. And it's usually a 4-week program where you go for half days, and it's more subjective than other evaluations, but there's an eligibility checklist that they go through, and you should contribute what your answers and feedback is about whether you see losses over the summer. Historically, that's really the best data we have, is whatever's happened in the past.
If you want to go to our website and go on our guide to special services, bringing knowledge to the table. Whoops, that doesn't really work. On page 21, there's a lot written about extended school year. Is the ABAS 3 an objective test or a questionnaire? ABAS 3?
Oh, the adaptive, I can't see what you're looking at, but adaptive behavior, is it
Mhm. Yeah,
Okay.
ABAS 3. Sorry.
Is it objective? Yes, because it's asking about, it's asking a clinician about objective and the parents' input on adaptive behavior. So what I mentioned before, like the functional things of whether somebody could do their ADLs independently, that's the kind of questions that is asking. It's not performance-based, like there's like a kitchen task test where you ask a child to carry out a certain task that you do in the kitchen, and that shows whether they can complete that functional behavior. And ABAS is an opinion instead, but still good.
Should school evaluations such as the Woodcock-Johnson and IQ testing be done annually? No.
No, unless there's been some significant change, like something happens. We didn't talk about COVID, but like, some kids who might have been tested during COVID and had briefer evaluations, evaluations that were even remote, those things might need to be redone or updated. Um, if a child has a concussion or a major illness or long COVID or something like that, you might want to have testing done again. But the system is set up so that they have a triennial system every 3 years. And unless something happens or there's a lack of progress completely, like a stalling of their progress, and you need to get to the root of why, those are the only reasons why you would do the testing again.
Should it be from the same person? Should it be done at a certain age, for example, 3rd grade and older?
And what was it for? Did it say?
No. Excuse me, should IQ testing be done at a certain age,
And how old's the kid?
i.e. 3rd grade and older?
Okay. No, there's no need to, so IQ is stable, except that it increases year over year when you're young. When you get to about 40, you start declining. It's sad. But there's no other reason to do that particular test now.
What are examples of what could be put into a 504 or IEP for kids with social emotional issues? For example, making siren noises in class, crying when they have to finish schoolwork, stuff like that. Mm,
So that sounds like escape behavior to me, big time. So that is something I mentioned earlier about the functional, an FBA,
behavioral
functional
assessment.
behavior analysis. Yeah, having somebody watch why somebody does something, what's the function of their behavior. So, for example, like a child who starts making noises and in the middle of class, they might have just been asked to do something and they're avoiding doing that. That's called escape behavior. So FBA all the way, I would do for that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um, does the school, okay, this is a follow-up to a past question. Does the school have to change a disability classification if the parents object and if they have a medical diagnosis for a different disability designation?
So it doesn't match the clinical diagnosis that they
Right.
got.
The disability classification that the school gave them, one of the categories, and the
Right.
medical diagnosis is different.
I
Um,
wish I knew what this condition was because if the person's still there to hear and could say, because the answer is slightly different. Most of the time, I'm going to say the answer is that it doesn't matter so much what we call it. It matters what's, like I said before, the specific goals that they put in the plan, in the IEP. Um, but if there's like a non-acknowledgement of the person's disorder entirely, then that's not okay, and that
yeah.
needs to be addressed immediately. Yeah.
Um, what would you do if your child's clinical diagnosis of ADHD did not match the school classification of ASD? We've been happy with the interventions on the IEP up to this point. So, I,
That's interesting.
yeah.
I have that I have that in my practice all the time, actually. Specifically with those two diagnoses too. So sometimes they get classified with one, but then the diagnosis for the other happens later and they don't sync up. And sometimes the IEP really needs to incorporate the new information. So as long as the IEP is following what is the most up-to-date clinical information, like a newer diagnosis, um, for their intents and purposes, they really should change the classification. But will it hurt or shortchange your child? No, because if those goals again are addressing the issue, then it should be okay.
Mhm. Do you see on your screen the very long question at the top? My child has a diagnosis of anxiety and has a 504 plan.
Yes. Yep. Um, okay. Um,
I'll read it out.
Okay.
My child has a diagnosis of anxiety and has 504 accommodations, but I believe they also have ADHD or some other underlying causes. When I requested testing for special ed services, the school felt they didn't qualify for testing since they've done well on testing and haven't failed any classes. My child attends after-school programs where they receive support and tutoring, which has helped them not fail. But without this support, I believe their grades would be in danger of failing. They struggle with completing work on time, and that causes their anxiety to worsen. The school decided to increase their 504 accommodations instead of doing testing. And if that doesn't work, then we'll meet again and consider testing. I was upset because they made it seem as if my child wouldn't qualify for special ed services with an IEP because they're doing okay right now and aren't failing. It made me feel that mental health wasn't enough of a reason for an IEP classification.
Right. So it's in process, it sounds like, and but a lot of people, a lot of parents are having this kind of experience where they're not sure if the testing is going to be done, and um, feeling like they're between a rock and a hard place with is wondering if the system is set up to be waiting to fail in order to qualify for services. That shouldn't be the case. I have to say, with like really good communication between the school. I think that the school and the parents often are like in silos, and often don't have FaceTime and opportunities to talk about these things. But when the concern comes out, it usually is not out of the blue. And when you can communicate all of the concerns, the school usually does see reason enough to do the testing. They can reject doing the testing technically, but only if they have no suspicion, no reason for suspicion that there is a classification category. And if the child already has a diagnosis, that alone means that they should have suspicion. And that satisfies that sniff test right there. So I would hope and assume that what happens is that testing will definitely be done. But I understand the feeling like it's a rock and a hard place, giving them all the support so that they don't fail. But you really can't go wrong with having somebody have tutoring and executive functioning kinds of supports when they have ADHD. Those are lifelong things that they need that reinforcement, whether it was getting that specific thing at school, it probably would need it outside of school as well. It's that pervasive.
If a standardized assessment was administered for an initial evaluation, for example, the CTOP2, should the same test be administered at a triennial eval to assess growth or progress?
Yes, I always want to have at least some of the tests be apples to apples for comparison. It wouldn't be the only test, but that is actually a good one, and is good for serial, repeated um, administration, so you can compare them over time.
I'm not, for the benefit of parents who get an independent psycho-ed eval and bring it, please describe how the school team will respond.
It's very hard to say, right? Like we don't we don't know. But typically, I would tell you the tips for this is that you wouldn't just show up at the meeting with it, right? So you would be very collaborative, and you would say to the school that you have concerns and you're going to have some outside testing done, and then provide it to the school that they have enough time to review it and be able to talk about it when you do have a PPT. That's
Surprises are not good either way.
no,
You know,
never.
you just surprise the school team with something, or for them to surprise you with something, which does happen. So the idea of getting the information from them 5 days before, and for you to give the information that you have 5 days before, is a good one.
Absolutely.
And the last question, and this will be the last question because you've done, thank you, Mary. I can't believe that you've stayed so long.
Okay.
I have an issue with my daughter on the spectrum in which she's high functioning, however, has major anxiety issues and social concerns. She's in a great therapeutic special education private school, but again, her source of peers, her source of peers is more intellectually challenged.
Hmm.
Our daughter wants to be challenged more in her studies. She has school testing coming up. Are there specific tests for this? Or what is the way we can support our daughter who is high functioning, but in an environment that might not be working for her?
So like thinking of having to change the school placement, it sounds like they're contemplating whether that's the right school and can there be testing that kind of measures so that you can make that determination. I think that it's hard when I'm assuming this is an outplacement, the reason enough to have reason enough to move from one therapeutic school to another therapeutic school. So I would say think about what the areas are that you think need to be that are concerns for you, because those would be what you want an outside evaluator to be doing testing for, to kind of like let that be fully evaluated so that you can make recommendations and say, these are really the issues, and this is better served at this other school that's known for doing that same thing. So and when you say high functioning, that might mean that you need to do an IQ test to show that there's a high intellectual capacity, and that's not being served perhaps in the environment. But maybe there's another therapeutic school that's on the state department list that the school would be more open to, that they can tell from the testing is a better match for the profile that you just got in the testing. Is there any other aspect of that, Eve, that you could think of that's like uh,
I don't know much about their, I know.
yeah, yeah, I
But
would say
um,
yeah.
thank you, everybody saying thank you and very welcome. And
Yeah,
thank you, Mary. This was awesome. And
you're
yes,
welcome.
ladies are wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for, and once again, if you have any specific questions that you feel, that come up about this and you want to send them to us, feel free to do that either at info@spednet.org or at eve@spednet.org. And Mary and I are happy to follow up with you guys. You will get a copy of this. You will get it emailed to you, and then it will live on our website along with the PowerPoint. So you'll be able to share it with your spouse or look at it again or share it with your team or whomever. So thank you all for coming. Thank you, Mary. It's been
You're
great.
very welcome. Good to see you.
You too. Okay,
Take
bye.
care.